Now, did you have a sense that he had departed from identification with an ego? Like, did you feel that there had been a seismic shift on that level, or?
Not so much on the egoic. That took a while because he's a very strong ego. He always had the detachment. So Sat Shree, even as a human, always had detachment from people around him. So that could be family karma. It could be coming from his family situation where the safest way to be was detached. We have a really crazy family.
See, I think
it's good to become emotionally detached if you're able to do that. He was born that way. So he came, but when he had this awakening, remember, it was all experience. So a lot of it just cleaned a lot of the system out, but there's still personality existing. So it's really difficult to begin to divide the personality from the ego. So there were remnants of the ego, there probably still are, bits and pieces that are not completely fully out of the system because it's how you function. But for him, I think it was a process over time. There was that initial blast that he went through and cleared out a lot of the ego structure, a lot of the identification structure, but then the rest of it just took time to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a period. So it was because during that period of time there was so much, I wouldn't say chaos, that's the wrong word, but say, you're on a track and all of a sudden everything goes in the other, completely in the other direction. So everything shifts, your whole point of view, everything. Well, it may have all happened, but how long does it take the mind and the ego to catch up with it? It takes a long time. So you're trying to figure out what the heck is going on. You're trying to redefine the landscape because the road no longer looks like a road. The people around you no longer look the way they used to look. So you're now having to go through and sift through and try to figure out where you're going to ground with this.
Yeah.
So in that process, that part of it too is he went off to India in 9 months, Julian. So a lot of what happened, when he was going on his way to India, he's still having all these amazing experiences. He's moving in all these realms. And that continued for 6 years. But most of that time, he spent probably 2/3 of that time in India. So I never even saw that process.
Right.
So there was a whole chunk of it that he worked out with Bhagavan and on the ashram and whatever was happening in India that I wasn't even that involved in, even though we talked.
Did you miss him?
Sometimes I did and sometimes I didn't. Once I got comfortable being by myself. Mm. And once that happened, then I didn't miss him. There came a point it took about 3 years. So there was a process.
3 years.
3 years.
And was it like a grieving?
There was the grieving, there was dejection, there was all of it. It was all mixed into my own process of what was changing in my system and the process of letting go of a husband and a best friend. So all that I had to move through all of that. Mm-hmm. So it was dejection. It was despair. It was grieving. It was anger. It was being pissed off. And then it just slowly over time went away.
There had to be a kind of weirdness too, because it's in a way it's easier to deal with a literal physical death. Yes.
Yeah.
Because
they're not coming back.
Then it's
done.
Like there's but this, it's like, well, that dude is still like walking, talking, living, breathing, like that body, that physical being is still there.
Yeah.
Why can't he just come back and be Scott a little bit?
Well, he
with
did,
me.
though. See, this is the thing. So this was the fun part of it. This is the part he would come. So the first time he left, he went for 9 months, but I went over there for 5 weeks. So I actually went to India. Bhagavan invited me because he wanted me to participate with this. So this is his support of me. I went over there, we traveled, met his family, lived on the ashram. Now, at that point, Sat Shree still didn't want anything. He was like, you're here, but I'm not gonna. And then we traveled together, so he had to travel with me. So he was still in his rejection of his human life, rejecting everything.
Mm-hmm.
So,
You must have been taking that personally.
oh yeah, I was really pissed. It's like, I'm here, I was invited, and this is, and then it was just like, well, but I know him, so I'm not going to be able to change that. He's doing what he's going to do, so I'm just going to have to make it work for me.
Yeah.
So I just made it work for me. So then I came back, and he didn't show up again until September. And there was a period of time where I just said, the best thing for me is I just can't talk to him. So I don't think I talked to him for like 3 months. And in those days, there was a phone that you could call to India. It was crappy reception. Half the time it didn't work. There was no email. There was no texting. There was nothing. So we would have periodic phone calls, and that's how we kept in touch. And then at some point, when he just goes into these huge rejection, you have to handle everything. Why don't you just divorce me? I'm finally like, why am I beating myself up here? And I said to myself from the get-go, I'm staying with this to the end. I want to see until I know it's complete. So all of this is going on, and I'm like, okay, this is going on. I don't have to beat myself up. He's going through his process. I'm just going to live my life here. And then he came in September, and he stayed for 2 whole weeks. And then what happened in those 2 weeks, at this point I had started re-engaging with what was happening up in Silver City at the ashram. And so they invited me to come and stay during the winter because the woman who owned that property and maintained it was going to India. So I went and stayed up there for 3 months.
While you were working and everything?
Yes. So it wasn't that far.
Mm-hmm.
I drove down Geiger Grade to Reno. So I did that. I still managed, I rented rooms out at the house. So the mortgage was paid. And I lived up in Silver City. And so by doing that, I actually put myself into another level of commitment. So I began to hold the space for that group up there. Mm-hmm. And so I stayed there for 3 months. And then Bhagavan began to send Sat Shree back about every 3 or 4 months. And when he got back from here for his 2-week stay, Bhagavan said, you didn't get it. Because at this point now, Sat Shree's in the process where he's afraid he's going to lose something. And this whole structure was designed to keep the experiences coming. So he was afraid. He was afraid that somehow I was going to, this life was going to hook him back.
You're saying that he, during that stage, was thinking that it's about having these experiences.
That's what he thought it all was. And so seeing what happened with him, I totally understand this focus on experience and people thinking that the experience is that they've reached enlightenment through the experiences. Because they're so overwhelming and so compelling. I watched Sat Shree do everything in his power to keep those going. And he was able to do that for 6 years. And then they ended. And then that was like a big opening too. It's like...
So what is enlightenment then?
That's a good question, isn't it? It's when you for me, I think it's when you fully wake up to what this is and to who you are, or to what you are. And that's it. then the paradigm shifts, and it's a permanent shift. And since I don't have that experience, I can't tell you what it is, other than having momentary glimpses of it, of waking, having those moments of seeing it for what it is, and then it closes down. But his stayed away. He came and went, or his came and grew, but he didn't even know what was happening. All he knew that Bhagavan, he's in India with Bhagavan, and Bhagavan in the whole time was training him how to do this, what these things meant, holding him in the hardest part of it, because if anybody's going to go south, I think, in this process, it's during the experiences, because you think that's who you are. And they're so compelling, Julian. Mm-hmm. To watch somebody like him get held up or stuck up or, for 6 years, thinking this was it, and then they ended. And then there's a period of time where there was nothing going on for him.
Mm-hmm. What did you observe happening with him during that
He was in India.
Oh, okay.
He just completely checked out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for him, you've heard his story. He was like, what do I do with myself? I've had all this, now it's all gone. What does this mean?
Right.
It just had completed. And then the opening was for the next thing. And at that point, Bhagavan has said, oh, good. You've gotten through this phase successfully. You made it through. So now you're ready for the next step. And for him to even get to the next step, he had to come back. And he began to teach for Bhagavan. And then he opened up the center in Sacramento. And then somewhere in that is when the next phase hit, mm-hmm. where he then had the realization that stayed with him that he's the what, he's everything. There is no guru, there is no student, there is no teacher. Mm-hmm. It's all the same.